Despite international efforts to broker a ceasefire, there's still no end in sight to the deadly crossfire between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. More than 250 rocket and mortar rounds have been fired into Israel from Gaza since Saturday. The toll of Palestinian lives claimed by 6 days of Israeli airstrikes in response is now approaching 400. With Israeli forces continuing to mass on the border, Hamas has vowed bloody resistance to any ground assault. I spoke with ABC Middle East correspondent Matt Brown a little earlier. Matt Brown, it's day 6 of the conflict in Gaza. What's the latest from both sides of the border?
The latest is that overnight here, Israel bombed the Parliament building in Gaza City. It also bombed the Justice Ministry, important symbols of Hamas's power there and important bits of its infrastructure, how it runs the Gaza Strip. They also bombed a number of tunnels that are used to bring weapons and food in from Egypt under the border, which has been blockaded. That brings the death toll to around 398, according to Palestinian medics, around 180 of those civilians. Now, Israel disputes that civilian death toll. It says that it's much lower. The UN's confirmed between 60 and 70 civilian deaths, but Israel's banned foreign journalists from getting into the Gaza Strip, so we can't give you an accurate picture independently. On the Israeli side, in the last 24 hours, there have been around 70 rockets and mortars fired into Israel, and since this operation began, 4 Israeli civilians have been killed.
Now, Israel's actions have been from the air, predominantly, but there have been preparations for what appears to be a ground war of some form. When will that happen, if at all?
The one reliable Israeli broadcaster is saying sometime after this Friday, but really surprises the element here. There's been bad weather the last couple of days, which have hampered aerial operations. Good weather now, but really it's anyone's guess because this is a very powerful, very capable army. But I do think a ground operation is very likely. After all, Israel can't do what it wants to do just from the air. It's got to get into the Gaza Strip. If it wants to really stop these rockets from being fired and stop Hamas from being able to recover easily, it needs to get in and get to the rocket workshops and the homes, in some cases, where these rockets are being made and stored.
But there would be presumably enormous risks in a ground war, so what's Israel's exit strategy? Have there been any indications there?
There have been at least parameters made obvious. No one in Israel wants to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. They left there in 2005, they removed their military bases and their settlements, and no one really wants to get back there except for the far right wing who never wanted to leave in the first place. It is one of the most densely populated places on earth. You've only got to walk through the refugee camps, their crumbling concrete buildings, to see how densely packed they are, how difficult it would be for an attacking force, and really what great risk there would be, not only of Israeli soldiers being killed in those close confines, but of course of very many Palestinian civilians being killed at the same time.
So whatever strategy has come up with, by virtue of what you're saying there, the reality could be starkly different.
That's right. I mean, military planners are fond of telling us that they hope for the best but plan for the worst. And I think once the genie's out of the bottle, once Israeli military forces are in Gaza, it's going to be difficult for them to control completely the tempo of their operations and what happens, although they've had a long time to plan this, and it's a very sophisticated planning process that they've gone through. So Hamas's warning, if they come in, there'll be surprises, that they will suffer dreadfully, that the Israeli public will be shocked by what happens to them. But the Israeli military is by far the strongest force, and I don't think that the risk of losing soldiers is going to stop them from going in. They're very determined to bring this rocket fire to a halt and to force Hamas into a position where it must accept a ceasefire and be bargaining from a very weak position.
Matt, how much are Israel's decisions in this conflict being shaped and guided by the lessons learned in Lebanon during 2006?
Well, a fair bit, and the public, and especially strategic thinkers, influential people in Israel, are hoping a great deal, because in 2006, Hezbollah militants, people who are in South Lebanon, snuck across the border into northern Israel, kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers, and started firing rockets in large numbers on northern Israel. Israel said it was going to war to bring those soldiers back and to smash Hezbollah. And after more than a month of war, it failed to do both of those things before agreeing to a ceasefire. That made it look like a failure in the eyes of many in the Middle East, even though it had killed many Hezbollah fighters and indeed Lebanese civilians. So this time around, they're being very careful about what they say. They say they want to stop these rockets from falling on the Israeli civilians in southern Israel. It sounds like a clear, attainable goal. But the question is, how do you do that? They're obviously, it seems, not going to reoccupy Gaza. That would allow them to be on hand to smash any rocket launching networks that they detect very quickly, but it would also mean they'd be enmeshed in a dreadful insurgency. As I've said, they're unlikely to just stop with what's been happening now, bombing from the air, because they won't have degraded Hamas's capabilities enough. So what seems likely is a very intense invasion, but for a limited time. And at the end of that, to then say to Hamas, all right, now we might have a ceasefire, but obviously we're in a position to dictate terms.
On the question of a ceasefire, the international community is starting to react to this conflict, and the calls are growing ever louder for a ceasefire. How will Hamas and Israel react to those calls from the international community?
Well, at the moment, both are rejecting that in a sense. Israel has said that now is not the time to halt its operations. It's having the desired effect on Hamas. It really has hit them hard, and their military capability has been degraded quite a lot. And now is not the time to ease off. Hamas, for its part, has said it would consider a ceasefire, but that it wants Israel to stop its bombardment and to lift its blockade, which has been in place for around 2 years and has crippled the Gaza economy. That's what people want out of Hamas in Gaza. That's what its subjects want, an end to this blockade. So for the time being, neither side's blinking.
Matt Brown, as always, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Scott.